Hello, and thank you for joining us for the December 2022 edition of the Space Talk monthly series with the UChicago Space Network. My name is Josh Levitt. I'm a UChicago alumnus, and it's my duty and joy to help provide intellectual engagement and professional development programs just like these for fellow alumni and friends. Today, we'll explore some more of the tech side of the aerospace industry, optical sensors, data intelligence, and software products that can enhance the observation capabilities and the safety of satellites. First, we'll hear from Dave Fisher, president of the UChicago Space Network, and then UChicago Space Network board member Gaurav Kumar in conversation with Scout Space Inc. VP Scott Nelson. Stick around after the conversation to learn more about the UChicago Space Network and its exciting initiatives to coordinate with students on campus who are keen on aerospace careers. Dave, over to you.
Thank you, Josh. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the December installment of the UChicago Space Network Space Talk. Super excited to have Scott Nelson here with us today. I'll let Scott and Gaurav do the introductions next, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on the University of Chicago Space Network. We're a pretty young organization. We're about 2 years old now. We exist to bring together alumni and current students to learn together and to network, to do business together, to do recruitment, to do new business with each other in this really burgeoning and exciting space economy. So thank you for being with us today. Gaurav, over to you.
Thanks, Josh and Dave. As I was introduced, I'm the VP of Communications for the University of Chicago Space Network. And before starting, I just wanted to take a moment to recognize the splashdown of Orion. During the last November Space Talk, Artemis 1 was just launching, and here we are in a month's time, and Orion is back on Earth, illustrating the dynamic nature of the space industry. So today we are joined by Scott Nelson, who is the VP of Product and Strategy at Scout Space. Scott has a lot of experience in financial services industry prior to venturing into the space industry. He has experience in trading equities, software developments, and product management. Scott currently lives in Chicago and was born and raised in Frankfurt, Germany. He has a Bachelor of Science with concentration on finance from Indiana's Kelley School of Business. And we welcome Scott to the December Space Talk. Welcome, Scott, and thanks for your time.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Perfect. So Scott, what we do during these space talks is that we talk about your personal and professional background. We speak about the industry and the latest developments, as well as the foresight for the future development. And then we would really appreciate if you can also share some guidance with the university community who have a deep interest in space as to how they can design a career which could be very visionary and a landmark in the space industry. So diving in, can you please give a brief overview about your professional journey and some of the key decisions you have made in your professional journey thus far?
Yeah, sure. I definitely, just as a heads up, feel free to cut me off whenever if you want to interject. I'm definitely known to go on tangents and definitely don't want to take up all the time. But I guess briefly, about me, like you already alluded to, I was born and raised in a small town in Germany. I have an American father, a German mother, and I lived there until I was about 16. And I played basketball growing up, and it was basketball that ultimately brought me to the States. When I was a teenager, I decided to stay, go to college, and got a finance degree. And sort of throughout school, I was, because my father was an accountant, I knew that business was something that I wanted to follow in the footsteps of. At the time, I didn't really know why. It was proximity rather than anything else. And I think a lot of people probably feel that way. It's easy to kind of see, my father does something that's interesting, or my mother, and kind of jumping into that. And so for me, it was that. I then did an internship in accounting and realized that was not it. That definitely didn't spark my passion. And so I was, in a great business school at Indiana University and trying to figure out what do I do from here, because accounting wasn't really the thing that I wanted to do. So that sparked this idea of going into finance and going into trading, being around highly competitive and motivated individuals and trying to beat the market. And that really, I think, was the spark for me in undergrad that allowed me to kind of push forward. And I felt like I had it figured out. And fast forward, I think I did about 4 internships throughout undergrad in different areas. I was at Goldman, I was at a portfolio manager, and then ultimately I was also at Morgan Stanley for 2 internships. And that, to me at the time, felt like the right fit. And I really loved the culture, the intensity of it, and just the quality of people that were there. So, fast forward, I graduate and I, joined Morgan Stanley at their equity trading desk in New York, which was a very intense experience, because Morgan Stanley is located at, in the heart of Times Square, and it's busy, and you get to know Times Square really well, and you're on a trading floor, and you're a trader, so there's just a ton of energy there, and I enjoyed that, and there was also like a strong still Wall Street hazing culture, so everything there just allowed you to bond with the people that you were working with quite heavily. And yeah, I mean, fast forward, I spent 2 years on the trading floor, and I realized that the type of trading that we were doing just wasn't really the thing that I really thought I would be doing coming out of undergrad. I think I was more interested in sort of proprietary trading and really generating ideas and trying to execute on those. So I felt it was the wrong fit. So I asked for an internal transfer with the firm, and they sent me out to San Francisco to do it was more of a research and sales role. And I think San Francisco, even though I had some inkling that I was interested in technology before that, I think it was really the experience of being in Silicon Valley and being surrounded by people who are building technology. I mean, you'd go to a coffee shop in downtown San Francisco, and people would just be coding around you. And that was something I hadn't really experienced in New York, or even in Chicago or at university. So, and after about a year in California, I kind of said to myself, okay, I had a little bit of a quarter life crisis, I'm not going to lie. And I kind of asked myself, what's next? Is this really what I want to do for the rest of my life? And I had a really strong interest in exploring other areas. So I think I made an aggressive decision at the time. I just decided to leave the firm. It was, bonus round came along. I collected my bonus and I said, I'm out, and stirred the pot with that a little bit. I don't think really anybody in my company at the time understood it, but I felt it was the right move. And I ultimately ended up moving to Colombia for about 6 months. I bought a one-way ticket. I always wanted to learn Spanish, and I just traveled around and decided to kind of explore some new things. And while I was there, I tried different ventures. I started learning how to code more, and I really found that software was something that I found fascinating. And so really, I spent 6 months traveling. I came back to the States. I sat down and I coded 10 hours a day for about 6 months, and said, okay, maybe I'm good enough to go get a job now as a software engineer, but we'll see. And it did work out for me. And so I then ended up spending about 5 years building software, still in the financial services arena. And the product I was sort of product agnostic in that role, in a way that I really enjoyed learning about technology. And I realized that this is it, just building, learning, being around engineers. This is really where I should have gone. And I was just super excited to be in a seat like that, and to learn every single day. So I just kind of shifted that into higher gears, and tried to imagine, where would I want to take that? Do I always want to just be coding, or do I want to actually manage complex projects and turn this growing technology into actually sort of like a more of a management direction? And one of the things that I decided was that I wanted to continue to dive deeper and deeper. So about 2.5 years ago, I hired a private tutor in math and physics. I've been working now with him. He's now a really good friend of mine. He lives out in Boston. And because I felt like I could really, if I had somebody that I could be accountable to, I could really continue to develop the skill set that I didn't go to university for, but leverage the modern technologies of Zoom and iPads and YouTube and Udemy and all the different course software that's out there to continue to develop my my knowledge base. So yeah, I think for me, once I started, diving more and more into STEM and continue to build software, I realized, okay, I think I have retooled and I think I can add value. I now have a financial background, I have a management background, I have worked on software and complex systems. Where do I go with this? And I think then the door opened for me mentally to say, maybe I can sort of choose the industry now that I really want to get into and get out of finance. And there was a very short list, and space was kind of at the top of it. And I always had an interest in physics. Physics was my favorite class, in high school. I remember in 7th grade, I built a toaster and really had a good time with that. And that was those are some fond memories. And I kind of said to myself, this could be it. So yeah, and I think that's how really the relationship started. And I started reaching out to my network, and I found a friend of mine who worked at Techstars. She put me in touch with Scout. I started speaking to the founders, and relatively quickly realized this could be a good fit, and they were looking for somebody with my experience to help augment their team. And fast forward, I ended up consulting, doing contract work with them for about a year, and then joined in the summer of this year. So it's been about 6 months.
Great, thanks, Scott. That is very inspiring, and I believe you are fluent in English, German, and Spanish now.
Spanish, I wouldn't call it fluent. I would say conversational for sure. But languages are tricky because you really have to utilize them. I mean, I think my dad still cringes when he hears that my French is basically gone, because I spent about 10 years between high school and college studying French, and I haven't spoken it really in 10 years. And I was recently in Paris for a conference, and it was embarrassing. So it's something that you have to kind of keep sharpening, and hopefully with Spanish, it's not going to be the same fate.
Got it. And Scott, talking a bit about your decision-making process, and when you switched from finance, which was your core competency, and decided to do something very different, software development. Can you talk a bit about that decision-making process, and how did you build up that courage to leave something which is certain and jump into something completely different and change your environment? Why did you choose Colombia, for example, to shift yourself mentally for that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think I would love to give my 24, 25-year-old self more credit than I really can. At the time, it was very much, I'm done with this. I don't know if I want to keep doing this. And like I said, a little bit of a quarter life crisis. And, I had some money in the bank, and the whole world just felt open. I was just at that sort of high energetic state of my life. And I just really kind of wanted to take a risk. And I think it was a friend of mine who he is Venezuelan, and he suggested that I should go to Colombia. He said, you will like it. It's, go learn Spanish, do all these things. And I said, that sounds lovely. I always wanted to learn the language. And 2 days later, I booked the ticket, and 2 days later, I put in my notice, and that was kind of it. That wasn't really, at the time, it wasn't as thoughtful as I sort of would like to think about it now. But I do think that there was a little bit of, there was a component of kind of looking further up the ladder and looking at my managers and saying, what do they do every day? Do I find it fascinating? Do I find it interesting? Would I get out of bed in the morning? And especially when we were talking San Francisco finance hours. So New York, the New York City morning call with all our research analysts was at 7 o'clock Eastern. So that's 4 o'clock California time. So I was up every single day at 3:30 and in the office by 4. I kept pleading with my boss to take the call from home, and he wouldn't let me. So in the office at 4 I was. So, and I kind of looked ahead and I said, my managers are kind of doing the same thing. But I'm working 80 hours a week, and I don't really get to partake in the social life in California. And I don't feel like I'm really learning a ton of hard skills. A lot of what I'm learning was information that had a really short half-life, I guess one could say. So, business is extremely fluid, and stuff is moving constantly, and, earnings here, earnings there, but it's all old by the time you read it. And I think part of me felt that by the time the weekend came around, I just wanted to kind of decompress. And so I didn't feel like I had the energy to learn all the things that I was curious about while being in that job. And I to me, the only way for me to kind of like future-proof myself and to learn the things and to really build a technical skill was to walk away from the life. And again, in hindsight, maybe a little drastic. Maybe I could have done other things, but to me, it felt right. And I think that gave me the sort of the mental clarity to realize, wow, this was a crazy, a crazy job with crazy hours. And, when you give me all that time back, here are all the things that, you can accomplish when you have 80 hours a week that you can dedicate to other things, So that was definitely a realization.
Thanks, Scott. And then coming to Scout Space, can you talk a bit about Scout Space, the company, your role, and what is the strategic focus of the company?
Yeah, sure. So Scout, we're focused on providing optical sensors, data intelligence, and software for both the government and commercial customers. Our goal is to just generally enhance the observation capabilities of satellites, but also increased awareness for satellites. And that might not necessarily be for the satellite in situ itself. The company was founded, I believe, in 2019 by Eric Ingram and Sergio Gallucci, who are still the two founders, and Eric is the CEO and Sergio is the CTO. And the vision there was really to ensure that space traffic is better managed and be able to enable a safe expansion of the space environment. I have to give Eric and Sergio a lot of credit because this is a difficult industry, and it's high capex, it's high risk. There's a lot of competition, especially today, and both Eric and Sergio are extremely deeply invested in sort of this idea of space sustainability, and they've been space nerds since day one, and which I can't claim. I don't think astronaut was the thing that I wanted to be as a kid. I had probably more humble ideas of what my life would look like, but so to be working with people who are just that passionate about space has been really fun, and yeah. So from a strategic perspective, there's a lot going on. The United States is not the only country that is actively developing enhanced space capabilities. As the launch cost is coming down precipitously, that is yes, it's enabled for the United States through the likes of SpaceX, Rocket Lab, and Blue Origin, and all these different launch companies that are out there. But other countries have access to that or building competing services. And so as the whole industry sees launch as a bottleneck to really proliferate space and grow the ecosystem. So because it's just such a big factor in the cost equation. And as those launch costs have come down, more and more stuff is being thrown into space in order to fulfill either business or strategic needs. And so safety is a little bit of an afterthought a lot of times in industries, especially when they're developing. There's money or safety on the line. So for us, it's really crucial to ensure that the technology that can monitor the growing space environment is growing commensurately and at the same pace, or ideally, can outpace it, so that by the time we grow the ecosystem, this infrastructure is already in play.
Got it. Thanks, Scott. And can you talk a bit more about, for example, your day-to-day and your role in the company?
Yeah. So Scout right now, we're about 15 people, and we have our engineering team, I believe, is about 6, 7. And my role, I'm very tied into to our engineering team, to product, and to strategy. So every single day, I try to sit down with our CTO and try to understand, where are the fires today? What are we working on? What are our deliverables? What customer conversations have we had, either with government stakeholders or with commercial companies, and to try to tease out if there are potential market opportunities there that might align with some of the effort that we're doing. So, and those notions that get communicated often have a direct impact on sort of how we start to think about our products, the direction we want to go into, but also from a systems design perspective, the modularity of components that we may want to build, the software, the hardware. So it's kind of like it goes down the chain from that perspective. And then, of course, all the people who are listening can read about our government contracts as well. So Scout has won 5 government contracts over the last 6 months. We're part of the SIBR phase 2 with the through AFWorks. So we're working with the Delta II Space Command, and we're also working with A4L, the Air Force Research Lab, on that. We have a contract that we're working on actively with NASA, and then we have two contracts that are both phase 1s through the Orbital Prime program, which is a SpaceWorks initiative. And those are STTRs again. So we're working with research institutions on those. And then we're also part of the Tetra 5 demonstration mission, which is an ISAM type mission. And that's a regular standard direct contract, an OTA, as it's called. So, we have our hands full. We're a small team, and every single day we have to kind of look at what is it that we have to deliver? What do we want to deliver? How do we ensure that what we're building is something these stakeholders care about? Well, how do we think about that what we're building is novel? And also, how do we, deliver on the promises? So it's a lot of priority management. It's a lot of trying to also understand, okay, as we're building these things, making sure they're modular and that we're thoughtful about the engineering, because a lot of times, the term, technical debt is something that kind of comes up in these endeavors too. Every time there's a client in the equation, and there's deadlines in the equation, like best practices are the first thing to go. And, ensuring that we have a strong culture of excellence is something that is really super near and dear to my heart, because I've seen how bad engineering can cause so much pain later down the road. So it's a constant, it's a daily juggle to understand, what work has to be done, how do we do it, and which balls can we push forward. And so my day is really, I get up, I jump on our management call in the morning to understand, what everybody's working on, to see if there are any risks. And then it's really, it's a lot of calls throughout the day to talk to all the different engineers about what is being worked on, to help them understand how the thing that they're building kind of fits into the broader vision. Then I also, I meet with the other executives to understand, hey, what else is on the horizon? Who are we talking to this week on the commercial or the governmental side from a customer or potential customer perspective? How do we prepare for those conversations and to highlight Scout's capabilities and future capabilities most effectively? And then, of course, once we are in those conversations and there is interest, how do we push those forward? So it's kind of the whole gambit, and I think that's what I really love about the role.
Got it. And Dave has an interesting question. He says that Scout has really impressed him with how well the organization moves fast in getting the contracts in place and hardware on the orbit. He would like you to talk about how do you go about decision making and prioritizing the work, given how small your team is and you are stretched for resources.
Great question. I'd love to hear his thoughts. Maybe it is hard. It is hard. And, sometimes we fail, and sometimes we focus on the wrong thing. And I think over time we learn, and I'm still, I can't sit here on a high horse saying that I know everything. I've been in the space industry effectively full-time 6 months. So there's a lot of things that I still don't know. And there are a lot of things that I won't know for a long period of time. So what I try to do, and what we try to do is if there's a domain that we are unsure about, it's all about getting the right person in the room. So, the first thing is really to understand the surface of risk and the surface of really what we're trying to solve. And if we don't have strong answers internally, then it's about getting somebody in who can help us understand that better. Then it's a lot about just prioritization. And there's a great book by Atul Gawande called Checklist Manifesto. I don't know if you've read it, yep. But the simplicity of just creating a logical flow of things that need to get done and prioritizing those and pushing those aggressively. It seems too simple to work, but I think sometimes less is more. And so I think my style is, let's understand all the different options on the table. Let's try to weight them based on our understanding. If we feel like we don't have the certainty, let's get more certainty. And then depending on our time window, let's see if we can have like an expected value calculations for some of these steps, and then we can identify and polarize out, which one is the most valuable. And then once that decision is made, you just try to remove the blockers and get engineers the freedom to work on it. And also, culture is a big thing. I think if people are unmotivated to work and put the time in and work energetically, that will grind your company to a halt. So I think what we've done pretty well at Scout is just keep the momentum up. That's empowering people, even if they're new to the organization, giving them a chance to kind of grow and rise. And I think our engineers that we've brought on over the last few months, we've thrown stuff at them very quickly. And I think that's a novel experience maybe to some of them. And but just this idea that, hey, in order for us to succeed, we have to trust each other. Everybody has to really grow and grow fast. And if you get people who embrace that, then I think you can run at the type of speed that we've been running. And so it all kind of comes together. But knowing your why or what and the how. Well, the how is maybe sometimes less important, but really having a strong why and what. In my experience, if that is not there, then you run around in circles.
And Scott, how do you, so one of the things which might be helpful for the attendees is is someone looking to get into Scout and work for Scout. So what is your hiring process? Where do you go to get these excellent engineers and the talent?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think the space industry, it's growing rapidly, but it's still a very small world. And so, some of the hiring we've done has definitely been, I mean, it's a lot of sort of, oh, I know this person and that person, knows this person and that person has a good reputation, for a specific engineering task, right? I mean, there's certain things that, like there's certain roles for which adjacent or even orthogonal, pieces of experience can be extremely valuable. But if you're trying to hire somebody to do, guidance, navigation, and control, you probably want to hire somebody who studied that, because it's too esoteric, it's too deep. So, there aren't that many places to go look for that type of talent if you're trying to solve a specific problem. And so then it's just a matter of identifying those. I think for broader roles, outside of that, definitely, the standard, processes, the LinkedIn's, Indeed, all that kinds of stuff. So, we're currently actively looking for someone to help with our programs, our government programs, and we've got some really interesting candidates that have just come through the revolving door who saw the post and decided to apply. And like I said, I think, when it's a more generalized role, there are a lot of things that the space industry there are a lot of things obviously that are very complex. There's a lot of technical depth, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of different roles that are also, you don't need to know that much about space to be effective. So it's a lot more, those are things that you can kind of train up. And so it's a lot more about cultural fit, a lot more about personality in some of those roles. And so I think, like, always looking for the space background, always looking for the person who understands, DoD speak and all these different things, like, can be a detriment, because I think there are really, really, really great people who don't have any space background, who within 3 to 6 months would be able to pick up the 80/20 and really, really run fast. And I think we as an organization try to be open to that. And I think, Eric and Vladimir, our CEO, and Sergio have proven that by giving me a chance to kind of come in and say, Scott might not be we're not hiring him for his space expertise, but we're hiring him for his ability or his abilities that we think are valuable, and we need that in our firm, and we're going to give it a shot. And luckily so far that's worked out.
Yeah. And Scott, before we jump into the other question from Teresa,
Sure.
One question I had was, you said you have 6 months in the industry. How did you persuade Eric and Sergio and build that confidence to give you this opportunity? And what are the attributes, maybe from your prior experience, which has helped you to land this role and also, actually deliver results?
Yeah. So my general stance on sort of switching industries is that it depends. There's different shades of what that process might look like. I think in general, if there's an industry you want to work in, you can go work in that industry relatively quickly, because there are roles that you can fit. So again, I was doing a lot of software engineering, like project management, product management as well. But so I could have jumped into the industry, for example, as a software engineer, probably relatively quickly. However, my path, or where I wanted to see, is that I wanted to continue to compound on my career, and I wanted to continue to grow my leadership and management capabilities and really be at the table to make decisions. And of course, doing that in an industry that you don't know that much about yet, or you're still learning, even though there is a lot of adjacent knowledge that I've learned, it's hard because the people that have just spent 3 years of their lives building something from the ground up, blood, sweat, tears, they're protective of that, and I totally understand that. I would be the same way. So I think with that kind of mentality, depending on the role you want to get into, if you have the background, if you have something to kind of back it up with, and you're like, okay, I want to get into a leadership position in this industry that I don't have any experience in, then you have to build trust with people, and you have to actually showcase your value set to them. And for Scout, I knew I wanted to go small. I know I wanted to go high risk, and I wanted to be there as early as I could, just because I love that energy in startups of the uncertainty, and just sometimes it's a little hacky of how we did things in the beginning. And so when I identified that Scout could be an option, and that introduction was made, I think I looked for a personality fit and an idea fit. But of course, at the time, it was also hard for me to evaluate really the value of Scout as well as I can do now, maybe, and start slow. I knew that this wasn't going to go overnight. And I knew that I had certain capabilities and skill sets and values that I could help the company with and be valuable, but I had to show that first. And so I just kind of initially started, while I was still working my other job, to work with the team and to showcase that I can do work, I can do it well, and that I bring a unique vantage point to the conversations. And I think once that trust was there, and once the team was able to see that, I think that their conversation gets a lot easier. But without that, I think it's very hard. But so again, it all depends a little bit on what you want to do, and I would say that will drive the approach.
Got it. That's very helpful, Scott. Thanks for that.
Sure.
I'm taking Teresa's question. She is saying, emergency management is more than FEMA. It's also preparing for national cyber and environmental threats. What are your thoughts on bringing emergency managers to the space industry?
Sorry, the term? What kind of managers?
Emergency managers. So who are looking at different kind of national cyber and environmental threats. So essentially safety, I would think, oriented.
Yeah, good question. I'm trying to see how to answer that. I mean, well, first off, the Air Force now the Space Force, has they call their workforce guardians, has people proactively across all different types of commands and squadrons, looking at these things and trying to protect American or national international assets in space as best as they can. And there are a lot of active things that are being worked on, and also that's publicly stated. There's a lot of language just across the defense sector and across civil. So NASA to continue to ensure that space is safe, and that's why I think Scout has been able to succeed, because most of the money in space comes from defense, or from NASA, and it's really hard to find a company that hasn't been able to, that has succeeded in the space industry without working with the government, because they're the 1,000-pound gorilla. And so and they are actively funding projects and funding companies that are trying to innovate. And so in a way, I guess Scout is an entrepreneurial form of such an emergency manager, and there's other companies, like for example Kahan, who are building systems to kind of aggregate data, do data fusion, and then provide software analytics on top of that to ensure that operators can operate more safely. So and as these companies grow and as the footprint grows, there will definitely be room on the commercial side, and there already is, either on the commercial side or on the governmental side within the defense sector, to for people who are maybe trained in risk mitigation, who understand procedures and policies and all that kinds of stuff. And so yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the best way I can answer that. And
Mhm.
again, another way is to do that is to try to be part of the movement that steers space in a certain direction. I think that's what we're trying to do at Scout.
Yeah, yeah. So essentially, there are a lot of opportunities for emergency managers, and I think the industry will need more of them. And Scott, trying to combine your previous financial experience a bit, what are the sources of funding for Scout, and how do you see the sources of funding and the capital structure changing for companies like Scout going forward? And Mike also had an interesting thought, which he shared, that he's looking for some worthwhile investment opportunity. So if someone is looking for that, where should they look at in the space industry?
That is a good question. Well, the SPACs have underperformed quite heavily, so maybe that's one area to be cautious of. Not to point the finger at anyone. I think it's great that there's capital outlets, and of course venture capital and the whole financial ecosystem. It is a little bit of every single one of these institutions serves a purpose, and they have their own incentives. Venture capital or angels, they want to come in early, but they need exit opportunities. If there's no liquidity at the end of the tunnel, it's really hard for a venture capital firm that has a certain fiduciary responsibility to their limited partners to or their investors, I guess I should simplify, to be able to write checks to space companies if there's no real way to eventually get a return on that investment. And that's just the nature of it. And so therefore, that's why historically, the government has been the major source of funding, because shooting stuff on the moon or shooting stuff to Mars, like the Mars rover, which inspired millions of engineers out there, that's not something that's a huge loss. It's a terrible business idea, so I'm glad that VC is as active as it is, and I think even just the last cycle of investment, which was incredible, how much money was allocated to the industry, is going to have, even if it's been slowing down, it hasn't been slowing down that much, but also there was so much money being pumped in that I think so many derivative companies and so many derivative products will come out of that. And it really, the industry got accelerated quite strongly over the last few years just because of that. For Scout, there's really still like the traditional kind of ways of doing it. It's either you have a revenue plus profit, and that creates working capital. You have venture capital, or you have some sort of like kind of venture debt or something like that. And so I think for us, we're definitely in the venture capital plus revenue generating opportunities that have helped us tremendously. So SBIRs are phenomenal to kind of get off the ground and be able to kind of subsidize engineering efforts, and but of course they're not really there to generate a profit. It's really kind of paid for engineering. So it's really hard to scale on the back of that. So I think if you have if you're running largely a software shop in the space industry, I think your capital requirements are obviously a lot lower, and there's faster ways to growth and all that kinds of stuff. So and we're not quite super capex intensive. So there's if you're obviously building rockets or something like that, and this becomes an even more difficult subject. So I think we're always trying to actively raise money. Our CEO is always out there having conversations, because it takes money to build the things that we want to build or to take the risks that we want to take. So I think that venture capital is going to be and sort of giving up equity on our end to continuously fund working capital and put that on our balance sheet to be able to speed up the pace at which we're trying to move. I think will continue. And but I also think that our contracts, as we kind of start to graduate a little bit from the SBIR phase 1s into phase 2s into TACFI and STRATFI, some of these government programs, or phase 3s and sole source contracts, I think those will allow us to grow in a sense that we'll be able to unlock much larger pools of capital, but they will be directly allocated to specific mission driven and mission specific endeavors. I think again, working capital is really needed if you have stuff that you need to build, you don't have any revenue coming in, or you want to do a lot, or the things that you're building require a lot of research and development. And so obviously we want to do as much internal research and development as possible. We're all nerds, so we like to tinker, but at the end of the day, it is a business, and I think until we're really at the point where we have sort of critical velocity and we're really entrenched and we've really figured out our stride, we'll be playing the venture capital game.
Got it. Yeah. So essentially, a lot of government grants coupled with venture capital, and potentially maybe moving more towards more established institutional investors as the risk profile gets better of the company and the industry. And one more thing, Scott, is talking about a bit about your educational background, because quite a bit of our audience might be students who are in their undergrad or postgrad studies. So can you talk a bit about your educational experience and how has that helped you in shaping your career, and also continuously learning about new things and building businesses?
Great question. And I always wonder how life would have turned out if I studied something differently in college, because now I love to code. I love to learn about, math and physics and all these different things. And I knew that there was an inkling already there back in high school, but, I was never really consciously thinking about it. It was stuff I was good at, but I went down the path of least resistance, which was finance. And I do have to say that, and I think business schools do a much better job these days. Back when I was in college, there wasn't really much of a STEM or technical component to my studies. So it was very business, marketing, finance, some degree of entrepreneurship, doing a lot of sort of the core business, things, accounting, law. And those are super helpful because they give you a broad overview of how the world is structured and how businesses are structured. And I think a lot of students that study STEM or study something that's not business related, that is a sort of a landscape or whole world that they just don't know that much about because they've never been exposed to it. And it's incredibly valuable as anybody entering the real world to understand, how our business, like all this money that's flowing around the world, how is it generated? How is it activated? How is it leveraged? How do you propel it forward and make use of it? And so I do think that for me, that was extremely valuable. And even my Wall Street, my time on Wall Street was extremely, extremely helpful because I got to see how the wheels turn at one of the top institutions in the world. And you're around these people that are in the news, who are shaping and writing these billion-dollar loans and whatnot. And I think that was really cool. At the same time, a lot of that stuff is also relatively easy to pick up. There's a lot of great books and there's a lot of things you can kind of just, you can kind of read about. They don't necessarily require a deep and long investment into sort of fundamental skill sets. A lot of it is it's just a very broad layer of knowledge, but it's not necessarily like built on a lot of like core ideas. Like, for example, you're not going to be able to do any astrodynamics work without knowing calculus. So you got to learn calculus first and do all these different things. So I think that's where having STEM background obviously is incredibly helpful because the whole world opens up and you can then augment it with this knowledge. And I think it's a lot easier to kind of transition coming out of high school where you just did calculus, AP calculus, statistics, whatever classes you took, it's all fresh in your mind to kind of transition into a degree where you're then using all that knowledge instead of letting it decay and then try to pick it back up later, just kind of sticking with some STEM, sticking with some technical knowledge, whether it's computer science or physics or something like that. And just fighting through it because you're going to come out the other end with such incredible tools to think about the world analytically, to think about the world, in a structured perspective. And if you can augment that with, taking business classes or just kind of a broad array of things, and then I think you're in really, really good shape to tackle problems that people throw at you. So I think if I could go back, I would have loved to take more computer science classes, more physics classes to kind of keep pushing and pulling on that thread and see what I find, because that world really fascinates me, and it took me a while to kind of figure that out as I got older. And but at the end of the day, and I think, or at least I guess I'm in a degree a little bit of proof of that, it doesn't really matter what you study. If there is a passion and there is a sort of there's a degree of discipline and consistency that you're willing to apply, and you can kind of learn anything at any point, any part of your life. So, when I first got back into, or when I first kind of started my coding computer science like study plan, I was like, oh man, like algebra, I forgot a lot about this. It's like, even though you're using things in sort of in business that are, and I was in Excel all day long, but and then there's this really funny meme that has this chart about all the things that you learn. You learn all this math, and then you graduate, and then you come back down and you're just back in Excel. And really that's how it was. And so a lot of stuff just like blank slate, my mind forgot and like pushed out. And so, but if you want to learn it, you can. And I think today more than ever, my sort of programming education, I think, cost me maybe $200. I just did a bunch of online courses and I learned a ton, and that was enough for me to go work, in the industry and actually be effective. So I do think it's possible. It's a matter of passion and interest. And, something like STEM or something like physics or math is really something that, doesn't gel with you. And someone is really much more interested on the sort of the social side of things or the policy side of things. That's cool too. But at least I would say at a minimum, it's helpful to augment that with some level of exposure to some of the big principles and sort of what drives industries. And I think I see the value of that now, and I wish I would have recognized that a bit earlier when I was in school.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And I think it's very inspiring that you actually went ahead and are taking classes on math and physics, and that shows your inclination towards learning, and that you understand that it's not easy to build that knowledge base and to achieve a success in a career or in an industry which you don't know about but are passionate for. So that's very helpful. And one more question, Scott, building on that is, you already gave quite a bit of advice, to the audience, but if there is anything else you would like to talk about, around career and advice to, for example, the students, what would that be?
This might be a little contrarian, so, but at least what I saw in college and how it worked for me was that, and it depends on the person. Some people have an incredible ability to absorb information, especially in the context of test taking. There are people who are bad test takers, and I've seen that, and who are extremely bright, and they get extremely nervous, or they forget about things because of the pressure of exams. So there's that too, and so this decision is something that each person has to make for their own. But what I realized in college, I think the smartest thing that I did is I really focused my freshman year. And when I was an undergrad, and I got a really high GPA my freshman year, and then I was able to kind of, I wouldn't say coast on it, but now I had this really strong data point. And of course, what you graduate with is an average of all 4 years. Compare that to some of my friends who, and again, Indiana University is a good business school, but it's also a big party school. And so there were a lot of people there who, decided to join fraternities their freshman year and whatnot, and ended up with a 2.5 GPA. And they spent the rest of college trying to dig themselves back out of that hole. So I think this idea of, giving yourself your first year to really set yourself up for a lot more mental sanity for the rest of college, I think is a really good idea. And then also being conscious about, and this is where it's important for students to also talk about people who are in the workplace, is to say, how much has my GPA affected my career? And unless you're trying to get into a really, really prestigious, like graduate program or a PhD or something like that, where a GPA might be a big portion of that evaluation criteria, I think it's a little bit of a trade-off that you have to think about, to say, how much effort is it for me to get a 3.3 GPA or a 3.5? And by what factor do I have to multiply that to get to a 3.7 or a 3.9? And in my experience, that scale is nonlinear. That is an exponential scale, and so you can be in university and get a 3.5 and go out and basically be, spend college taking a bunch of auditing a bunch of classes, and and having a strong social network and learning from other people, exploring and traveling or whatever. and still get decent grades, and then you're a lot more well-rounded. Or you can dedicate yourself entirely to university, and try to get a 4.0. But how much of that are you giving up? So, and I do think that's an equation everybody has to balance for themselves, how much sort of that GPA matters for them. But for me, it was something that I kind of told myself and realized for myself like my sophomore year. And I think ultimately what allowed me to compete, I mean, Morgan Stanley didn't recruit at Indiana. They recruited entirely and solely at Ivy League schools because it was more efficient for them. So, I had in finance, we call it super days, but it's basically, it's a final round of interviews where a bunch of kids come together and everybody gets interviewed sort of like people hop around. It's a little bit like blind dates. And out of those, like 13, 14 kids, of which most of them were Ivy League that day, only one person got hired, and that was me. And when I asked in retrospect, what was the differentiator? It was the feedback that I got was that I was significantly more in touch than the other students with what was going on in the financial world. And I think if I look back at my junior year and senior year, I was, again, like I was kind of leveraging my really strong GPA from my freshman year to buy me the flexibility to get a little bit of a lower grade and be able to actually spend more time reading and learning about the industry that I was going into. So I was trying to do more internships. I was constantly reading about finance. I was reading, all the Michael Lewis's books and all the history books on finance, and instead of trying to get an A+ in my accounting class. And so I think then when I got into the interviews, I think I had formed an opinion on the industry that I think few of the students had. So, but again, use this advice at your own caution. But I think that was something that worked for me, and I think as I look at some of my friends, it has also worked for them to kind of be conscious of really how are you managing your attention and your time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Scott, you mentioned about the checklist manifesto. You mentioned Michael Lewis. Which other books or authors you would recommend?
Oh boy. That is a really good question. I'm blanking now, even though I have book lists that are very long. So I really like biographies. I like autobiographies. I think, as the adage goes, he or she who does not read lives one life, and he or she who reads can live 1,000. And biographies are really nice, or autobiographies are actually preferred because it's written, sort of in first person by the person. And so Benjamin Franklin is one by Sir Walter Isaacson. I think that kind of really stood out. A really interesting individual who was, again, very, very thoughtful about time allocation. Went ahead, made some money in the media world, decided to sell the business, and then spent the rest of his life doing the things that he wanted to do by living a very sort of frugal life. But through that, it empowered him to have so much impact in so many different domains. And I think that is a story that always stuck with me. And yeah, there's a long list. I'm happy to share some of my favorite books. Most recently, I think another one about the space industry specifically was Liftoff by Eric Berger. Eric Berger is a science writer for Ars Technica. And what I enjoyed about that book was that it wasn't one of those Elon Musk, glorification books, but it was largely about what was it like at SpaceX when the company was founded? What was it like at SpaceX sort of like in the early days of engineering, and then taking that all the way to to making it into orbit with the Falcon 1. And it's purely based on interviews with the early staff members and engineers. And for all the buzz around Elon right now, what allowed me, or what I learned from that book, was that his management style is very interesting. And I think it's obvious that, I think the piece in the book that stood out to me the most was that, according to Eric Berger, Elon Musk interviewed the first 3,000 people that got hired at SpaceX. So even if, let's say, the hiring rate was 1 out of 3, even if that funnel was already fairly good for bringing talents, and that means he conducted over the course of 5-6 years about 10,000 interviews. And I think that shows his commitment to building a strong team, and how much human capital is really the thing that drives a company. And if you don't know how to hire, or if you disregard culture or bring the wrong people in your firm, they can grind they can grind you to a halt or can be the difference, obviously, between succeeding and failing. And so I think that was a pretty interesting read and something that stuck with me. So I would definitely recommend that as well.
Thanks a lot, Scott. And I would definitely endorse your recommendation on Benjamin Franklin's autobiography. I think it's a great book on entrepreneurship, community building, and all the different things which everyone should know about. We are really thankful to you for taking time, sharing your experience and knowledge with the community. Thanks a lot once again. And I will pass it over to Dave for some closing remarks.
Yeah, no, thank you. This was great. And again, I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the chance to engage the Chicago community. And, hopefully I get to meet everybody in person pretty soon. Like we said earlier, let's get together. And obviously for anybody who listened to this or will listen on the recording later, just feel free to reach out to me either on LinkedIn. I'm also happy to share my personal email with the group here. And, I'm in Chicago, I'm here all the time. So I'm happy to just grab coffee or a drink.
Awesome. Scott, thank you so much for being with us for the Space Talk today. Gaurav, thank you again for a wonderful interview. I think you might have a second career in cable news if you'd like one, Gaurav. I want to thank everybody for coming today. This is our final Space Talk of 2022. Our 2023 series will resume January 9th with Chris Quilty, who will be talking about launching a career in aerospace. Chris is one of the premier financial analysts in the space industry and also a proud Maroon. So please come and join us for that. I'd like to take a second here at the end of the talk today to highlight two of our board members who are on the call, Ian and Audrey. Ian McCann actually had the initial idea and kicked off these space talks some time ago. Ian is transitioning off the board, so I would just like to make one last big shout out to Ian for all the tremendous work that he has done in putting these together. And then Audrey Scott, who is actually a current student, a third year at the university, is joining our board, and she's joining our board as the vice president for event planning and student liaison. So Audrey, welcome to the group here, and looking forward to having you on the team and at all our future space talks. Everybody, I'd like to thank you once again for showing up. Happy holidays, and we'll see you all again in January. Goodbye.
Bye, everybody. Great to be here.
Take care.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure serving this community for the past year and a half. So thank you.
Awesome.